Hi, my name is Dr. Padilla. I'm a professor in computer science and psychology, and I have been a faculty member for over 5 years. I wanted to talk to you today about a topic that I've been thinking about deeply ever since I started this YouTube channel, and it is how to thrive as a woman in academia. Now, this is a topic that really affects me, and I think it's something that we don't talk a great deal about. So I wanted to have some real talk with you about some things that have affected me in the past, some strategies that I've seen work well, and just create a space where we can talk and think about these ideas. So the first thing to acknowledge is that women historically have been excluded from academia. Historically, women haven't had the same access to educational opportunities and were outrightly excluded from things like pursuing doctoral degrees. For this reason, we're still seeing the ramifications of those types of historical arrangements where fewer women are in academia as a whole. Now, this changes from field to field. Some fields have larger proportions of women than others. So you might find yourself in a place where there's many women around you, or a place where you might be one of the few women in your particular field. Because of this historical reality, it can be quite challenging to be a woman in academia. And there are a few major reasons why that I've observed in my own life. I think the first one to acknowledge is that everyone has biases. I have biases, you have biases, and all of your colleagues have biases as well. It is a fact of being a human that we are all going to have biases. And what is a bias? It's an unconscious belief about someone's abilities or capacities that is not based in actual evidence. So this is an assumption that you make about people that may or may not in any way reflect reality. Now, fortunately, the assumptions that people tend to make about women doesn't tend to align with people's expectations for academic success. When we imagine a professor, for example, the first person to come to mind isn't necessarily a woman. And we've actually seen these in interesting AI models where you ask them to generate a picture with 5 professors and they'll put all men in those pictures. So it's both in humans and it's percolated through various other technologies as well. Now, when we think about what those specific biases look like when you're interacting with people, oftentimes they make the incorrect assumptions about how working with you will be. They'll make incorrect assumptions about the quality of your research, the rigor, your possibility for success, etc. Now, that is impossible for everyone to avoid. I do want to emphasize both you and I have biases as well. I'll link in the description a website where you can actually evaluate your implicit biases to see what yours are. So it isn't fair to say that people just shouldn't be biased, because that is impossible. Instead, what we should strive to do is to counteract our biases. When you're working with women or other individuals that are not classically represented in academia, try to think of counterfactuals for why they belong, the elements that indicate their success in the field. And it'll be very easy to find because there's no reason why anyone wouldn't be successful in academia. When it's coming to you, how people perceive you, you have to recognize that they might have these implicit biases. And that's an unfortunate reality, but I think if you do not understand that people will be coming to interactions with you with that framing, you might have incorrect expectations about what the field will be like. In particular for women, the types of biases that I've experienced include things like being expected to be very nurturing in my mentorship style, expected to take on many of the more clerical or secretarial responsibilities when I'm working in a group. Other things include being expected to take on additional service roles. Oftentimes what happens in academia is there's these different subcommittees that work on various projects. They want to ensure that there's diversity and inclusion in those subcommittees. So if you're the only woman in the room, you end up getting asked to be on all of those types of committees. And of course, all of these expectations might not align with who you are. As you know, we as women have so many diverse ways of being successful and approaching academia that it can be very stifling to have these expectations put upon you if those do not align with the way that you like to work and who you are as a person. Now, I don't have a lot of answers for this particular video. Normally I say 5 tips for being successful in graduate school or something like that. I don't have as many tips as I just have realities that I'm sharing, as well as some of the things that have worked for me. But I don't think that they're tips per se, because they might not be the right answer for you. But one of the things that has worked for me is building community. I was fortunate enough to be in a place where there were a few women in my field, and they were very generous in their time for mentoring me. And I went to them with all sorts of different problems that came up, and they told me about their personal experiences, and I was able to share mine. We didn't give each other answers, we just talked. And sometimes being able to share your experiences can be very, very meaningful. And I specifically sought out women in these networking experiences where we can build some of that rapport together. If you're in a field that has very few women, you might have to go to different institutions or, virtually go to different institutions because there's just simply not enough people with whom you identify for you to build community with. But I think if you take that step, if you surround yourself with people that empower you, that have shared experiences with you, and you can talk about it, that can truly help buffer some of the negative experiences you might have as being the only woman in a particular department or having some negative experiences because you are a woman. I myself have had my fair share of negative experiences being a woman. Everything from faculty assuming I'm a graduate student to inappropriate behavior at conferences, inappropriate behavior from students, the whole gamut. I've experienced it all. And it can be very tiring on the soul to be constantly going through these things at a higher rate than my male colleagues. But again, I think the times where I'm doing the worst are when I'm holding those in for myself. I'm not sharing those with my colleagues who would understand. It can feel very isolating to be in that position. And the times that I felt better are when I was able to share those experiences with my colleagues. Even if it was hard sharing those experiences at the time, I felt like I was able to heal from some of those very seriously negative experiences. Another little piece of advice that I find to be very useful is understanding how incredibly distractible people are. And this is for everyone. I think everyone is very, very distractible. And I think that plays itself out more when people are talking to women. So what I find is if I'm doing anything out of the ordinary, people tend to stop listening to what I have to say and start being distracted by X or Y. For example, right now I have, the best nail polish color. It's a silver chrome. I would never wear this type of thing to an interview because at some point people would start to look at my nail polish and forget what I'm saying. That is just an unfortunate reality. And I think acknowledging that was the case really helped me be successful because what it allowed me to do is take control over a narrative. When I want people to focus on what I'm saying, I make sure they're not distracted by anything else and I can gain their full attention. When I want to be more comfortable and approachable, people of course can be distracted by things at that point, and it's under my power when I want people to focus on me as a scholar and academic, and when I'm willing to allow them more into my personality and become more personal with them. That relates to the next thing I think is really important, which is that your professional persona doesn't have to be all of you. You can choose what parts of yourself to show with people, and it might be in a professional setting, you're only showing part of yourself. Don't feel compelled to be fully transparent at all times. You could do that if that is, in your wheelhouse, but a way to sort of protect yourself, to shield some of yourself and keep it tucked away and, secure is to strategically choose what parts of yourself to show in academic settings. I think being very strategic about that can be useful and, again, empowering you to make the choice. Don't let people make choices for you. I want you to be in control of how you're perceived. In some ways, that is taking some of the power back from all of these implicit biases that we all have as humans. Now, with that said, I think we have to acknowledge some of the unique biases associated with women. I talked about this a little bit earlier in this video, but one of the things that really irritates people is voice tone, and you can hear it going in and out for me, but vocal fry is something that affects a lot of women, and it's affecting me a little bit right now. I think you want to be very sensitive to that when you're talking to people because it, for whatever reason, turns people off. It's something you can absolutely work on, that I've worked on over time, and I think it's just something you need to think about. Another speech pattern that turns people off, specifically for women, is upspeak. This is where you end the end of your sentence with a question. So imagine I'm giving you a lecture and I'm discussing different topics with you, and we're going to discuss important ideas. We're just like upspeak, right? It's kind of annoying. And I think people tend to do it when they get nervous. So recognizing your speech patterns that are unique to women and just being very careful to use them strategically. If you want to use it, great, but make sure it's your choice. Don't make sure you accidentally fall into these speech patterns by simply being nervous. Another thing I see women do is slowly, as they're talking with someone, their pitch gets higher and higher, and all of a sudden, at the end, they're talking about these concepts because they're, really excited about it. Again, it should be in your control. You want to be the driver of your speech patterns, and you want people to recognize how brilliant you are. So make sure that you can have control of all of these tools that we have in terms of presenting ourselves. Last thing I'll talk about in terms of speech patterns to think about is using the word like and so. I use so all of the time in these videos. I find it very annoying watching myself, but also like can happen a great deal, particularly if you're from California. So it's just something to think about, that it is one of these types of biases, if that is in your speech pattern, to do your best to control if you're in an academic setting, because it automatically makes people think you're less intelligent when in fact it's just a speech pattern. And the last thing I'll talk about is setting boundaries. You will be in a position where people will have certain expectations of you that might not meet the way that you feel comfortable interacting with them. So it is important to set boundaries for yourself and do not budge. If you are someone who doesn't want to engage in emotional discussions with students, that is emotionally taxing on you. You have to set boundaries, and if a student comes to you and maybe they're crying or something like that, then just refer them to the appropriate support structures at the university. You might be someone who is actually okay to engage with that conversation. If so, do that. The point is that you have to set very clear boundaries, because in some ways you need to protect yourself both emotionally and your energy levels. So be clear about what those boundaries are and make sure that you can set them so that there's not this desire to kind of creep into your emotional energy, and that might result in you accidentally giving more of yourself than you feel comfortable. So I hope this was helpful. I have a lot more to say on this topic, and me and my female colleagues discuss this all of the time, and it can be truly challenging and taxing to be a woman in academia, but I love the field. There's many things that I love about it. I think the sooner I started to acknowledge that my experience was different than my male colleagues, it was more easy for me to come to terms and set these boundaries and these sort of protection structures to make me feel more successful in my field. If you have any strategies for dealing with some of the topics that we discussed today, please comment on them down below. If you have any other suggestions for types of content you would like to see, also please comment that. And if you like this video, I would very much appreciate you to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content on academic success. Take care.